Howdy, y'all. My name is Tiffany Keith. I'm the preaching pastor of Cowboy Band, soon to be Heartstrings. So usually we meet at the parking lot 9:45 on Sunday mornings, downtown Colorado Springs. And we're going to do that for another couple of weeks. And then starting November 29th, we are transitioning to a more permanent worship service. So Heartstrings starts at 10 a.m. on Sunday mornings, and we will continue to be in the parking lot as often as we can be, weather permitting, especially considering the numbers are rising so much.
I'm Kent Ingram, pastor at First United Methodist Church. I preach the sanctuary service that's shown 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings on television and in Facebook, and get to work with Tiffany as a guitar player in Cowboy Church. That's a lot of fun too. So, you want to help us with a prayer?
Well, yeah, I first want to mention that we are missing somebody.
We are missing
I mean, we
somebody.
should acknowledge that
Okay.
Patty is not here.
Yeah.
So Patty is not here today. She was planning on meeting us via Zoom, but, you know, it's just COVID world, so we're just going with whatever it is. Okay, so I will open us with a word of prayer. Gracious God, we spend our time during the week struggling over this text, over the scripture, over your word, over hearing a word and sharing the word. So help us in this time, during these minutes, help us hear your voice. Help us understand where you would have us go. Help us know your presence here with us as we are challenged, as we are comforted, as we hear your voice. Amen.
Amen. I'll go first.
Okay.
Let's go back text. We're in those weeks leading up to Advent. And every year in the weeks leading up to Advent, we have texts, both gospel texts and epistle texts, that are apocalyptic. That is, they deal with this second coming of Christ and the end of history as we know it, and they have these sort of ominous overtures to them, and they're difficult to preach. It's always a hard time to preach in November because you have these very difficult texts and trying to find something that seems appropriate and relevant to our time. But my text is from Thessalonians. Paul writes one of the earliest letters that we have of Paul. And it's again one of those texts. Now concerning the times and the seasons, brothers and sisters, you do not need to have anything written to you. For you yourselves know very well that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. When they say there is peace and security, then sudden destruction will come upon them, as labor pains come upon a pregnant woman, and there will be no escape. But you, beloved, are not in darkness, for that day to surprise you like a thief. For you are all children of light and children of the day. We are not of the night or of darkness. So then let us not fall asleep, as others do, but let us keep awake and be sober. For those who sleep, sleep at night, and those who get drunk at night. But since we belong to the day, let us be sober, and put on the breastplate of faith and love, and for a helmet the hope of salvation. For God has destined us not for wrath, but for obtaining salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, so that whether we are awake or asleep, we may live with him. Therefore encourage one another and build up each other, as indeed you are doing. A lot of stuff in there, and the first thing that I recognize when I read this is that Paul is sort of pulling back from his earlier teaching and preaching that Jesus is going to come today, if not sooner. I mean, there was this sense that the end of the world was imminent, that Jesus was on his way back. We just had minutes, hours, maybe days before this was to happen. And that was sort of the energy and urgency that informed that early church and the preaching of Paul. And now he's got to dial that back a little bit. He's going to have to say, you don't know, I don't know, we don't know when this is going to happen. So he's giving advice, encouragement to people who at one time believed that things were about to end. And now that urgency has been taken away from them. And I try to imagine myself in a church like that we can stay strong, we can be faithful because the end is on its way. But it doesn't come. And the persecution continues to happen. People are dying in the church. You have the travails and struggles of life. And they just keep going and going and going. And my sense is that when Paul writes this, he's writing to a group of people who are tired. They're just exhausted. They run on this high energy for years, thinking that today will be the end. And now it's not. And so when I thought about that, I thought about our time. I thought about how exhausted I am, how tired we all are, for lots of reasons. There's the pandemic that we mentioned. There's the election that we mentioned. There's the protests around injustice that we've all witnessed on television and in person too. And some parts of the world, they're having fires and they're having hurricanes. We've run out of names for hurricanes. I mean, this is an exhausting time to live. And so that was the perspective which I started looking at the text. What does Paul say to people who are tired? And boy, there's just lots of themes in here. There's just, night and day themes, sober and drunk themes. There's awake and asleep themes. There's just all these contrasts that he plays with the church. And I think I'm going to probably spend more time on the awake and asleep sort of theme. That's sort of the theme of this season going into Advent anyway. Stay awake, stay awake, stay awake. But why? I mean, if it's been 2,000 years now, right? And people keep dying and struggles keep happening and injustice keeps occurring. Where's the urgency? Why not just curl up in a ball and let this world kind of wash over you? And so, I look at what Paul says, and without giving away the whole sermon, there's still a sense in which Paul is saying we've got a job to do. Whether Jesus was coming tomorrow or 2,000 years from now, whether things are wrapping up immediately or a long way from now, we still have a job to do. We have to be people of faith and hope. We have to, that's the images he uses. We have to be a people who reach out to the world and hear the cries and deal with the brokenness. That being awake is not just so you don't miss something. Being awake is so that you can continue to be faithful and do the things that God has called you to do. So I'm going to spend a little time this week just sort of reflecting on how tired we are and how easy it would be to just give it up, to not have our energy in there, and then to see if we can rekindle that urgency, rekindle that fire. So what do you think when you hear these words from Paul?
So there's a couple of things that one really short. I mean, hurricanes, fire. Don't forget the murder hornets.
The murder hornets. Can't forget the murder hornets.
I mean, just because for my last week's sermon, because I'm in the apocalyptic kind of stuff too. I mean, but so it was interesting looking them up. They can kill an entire honeybee hive in a matter of hours.
Really?
They get them out of the air and take them home to their babies for dinner. I mean,
Really?
it's just anyway, the exhaustion. I mean, it reminds me of a TikTok. There's a TikTok artist and he gets in there and I think every day or close to every day, he will post like a newspaper article behind him on the video and like in a robe come out, look at the video with a coffee in his hand, it's the artistic rendering of first thing in the morning, getting up, reading the newspaper, going no, and turning around and going back to bed. I mean, that's what it every day feels like.
Yeah.
It just feels like, okay, what's it going to be today?
Yeah.
What is it going to be today? I mean, just the times are overwhelming. They
are. The other thing I think I'm going to talk about at the very end of this section, the last thing he says is encourage one another and build up one another. And there's a sense in which, I need that, and other people need that I can't just sort of gin up or muster up the urgency or the passion or the vision that I need today. I can't. There's just so many other things that are going on. And I need encouragement. I need somebody to say, and it's funny because I get letters, and 95% of the stuff I get is positive and encouraging and helpful. And one of the things about this season, for me in the service that I preach, the televised service, is that we have a lot of people watching us who maybe you're older and can't navigate the technology to watch their service on Facebook or whatever it might be. But every week I get 2 or 3 letters from people who just thank us, and I feel good. It's like, we're making a difference in these times here. But at the end, this sense of encouragement reminds me that when I'm struggling, I need your help, and when you're struggling, you need my help. And I think that's sort of not only true for the church, but the bigger lesson that we're learning is in a time of disunity, a time of just attacks and sort of vitriol and anger and division. I mean, that just seems to mark our time, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. What would it be if we, not only as a church but as a nation, tried to encourage one another? The phrase he uses is build one another up, build each other up, instead of tearing each other down. So I think I'm going to spend a little time playing with that.
As you're touching on it in different places and talking about your text, but Paul's leadership through long drawn out stuff, hard times, like keep at it. How are you feeling that text is helping you? How is it speaking to you? Because I know when we're looking at sermons, we're asking ourselves, what does this say to the church?
Sure.
But what I heard a lot in your words as you
Sure.
talked about it was not just leadership to the church, but Paul and him leading.
Yeah.
It is hard.
Yeah.
Trying to hold people together for a
Yeah.
long time.
Well, the interesting thing to me is that Paul does a lot of encouragement, and he does a lot of sort of exhorting people to hang in there and be strong, but he never loses the sort of missional edge. It's never everything's going to be okay for you. Basically, what I hear Paul saying, or at least a part of what I hear Paul saying here is that, hey, deal with it, Buttercup. You got, there are people who are struggling and hurting, and you are a child of God, and you know that. And you have been given the gifts of faith, and you've been given the gifts of love and of salvation. Those gifts are given to you, and you need to find a way to be able to share that and to not only focus on where your struggle is, but to see the people around you and to hear their cries. And a part of our urgency comes from being able to hear that. So Paul doesn't just let us off the hook. He doesn't just pat us on the hand and say everything's going to be okay. He's like, you've got a job to do. You've got a job to do. And some people respond to that kind of challenge.
Do you feel Paul saying that to you?
I do.
Even though you're tired.
I do.
You have a job to do.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm going to finally end up in this text. Is we're tired. There's warning signs all around us, but there's also real need around us. And as a child of God, knowing I'm a child of God, gifted as a child of God, I have an obligation.
Do you ever feel like, do you ever have those days where you're like, no, I just
Sure.
Not today.
Sure. Oh yeah, I mean, when you're empty, I mean that's a part of the rhythm of the Christian life is realizing when you're empty, so that you can be refilled again, so that you can be of service and use again. I think one of the dangers is to so empty ourselves that we're no good. We have to. I mean, like Jesus, he would withdraw. And I'm not good at that. I'm not very good at the kind of battery charging portion of this. I mean, I do it intellectually. I do it with my fly fishing.
I mean, so I guess that's what I'm thinking about. You used to, so pre-COVID,
Yeah.
like Fridays
Yeah.
Kent was fishing because
Yeah.
it was Friday. We just all knew, don't get
Yeah.
buried on a Friday if you
That's
wanted Kent to show up.
That's right.
Because Kent was fishing. That
Yeah.
was the rhythm, and you so clearly protected that space. I mean, when I came on staff, it's just, we
Yeah.
just know.
Yeah, sure.
But that's changed.
It has
I mean,
changed.
those kind of rhythms have changed for everybody.
It has. The rhythm of the week has changed, and so Sunday is Wednesday, and Wednesday is Sunday, and you know.
Because Wednesday we're recording.
Yeah.
So what you used to do is, kind of study, write, like Wednesday, write your sermon and play with it until Sunday.
Yeah. Now I got to write it and preach it. It's funny because it's hard, and there's no reason for this. I mean, they're just days in a week. They're just calendar days. But it's hard for me to get back into the mode of thinking about my sermon until after Sunday. And I don't know why that is. Friday, Saturday.
Even though Wednesday is your new Sunday.
That's right. Even though
the old Sunday is still.
Yeah, Saturday is not Monday. It's not. So anyway, that's one of the. It's a new change. It's a change in my rhythm. So I know pastors watch this. How do you are you finding the space? How are you leading your staff, your congregation, to find that space where you withdraw to the wilderness to recharge? And I don't mean like go watch Netflix for 12 hours and call that recharging, but whether it be fly fishing or you have so many contemplative people on staff. I do, and that's I don't know that I do that well, and I don't know that I really am encouraging that. The answer is I don't know, Tiffany. I mentioned a time or two in a sermon the need to sort of to cling to the habits and practices of the Christian faith. But boy, that's a tough. When the rhythm of your life changes. I speak for me. As you know, I'm a person who lives by a certain order.
Concrete personality type, rock solid.
Yeah, I do. You pretty much know what I'm doing every day because I do the same thing every day at the same time, and so it's hard for me to have that kind of upheaval and change. But I'm learning a new rhythm, and other than encouraging people to find their own rhythm, I don't quite know what to do about that. So, you have a rhythm yet?
I feel like you're stumbling around an answer is permission for us and the rest of whoever is watching, staff or other pastors out there, to not have answers either.
Yeah,
right? I think right now, your answer is often the answer. And the answer for me too, I don't know. I don't know that I have a really good rhythm of here's when I withdraw, here's when I refill, here's when I don't. I mean, as hard as I'm trying, I've started a new worship service in May, and I'm starting another new worship service in 2 weeks. Which have their own rhythms, right? There's no rhythm. It's just innovate, start something new, test, try, kill it if it didn't work, start something new, test, try. There doesn't feel like there's a new rhythm, and I feel like you and so many people everywhere right now are innovators, even if their personality type is not innovators.
So forced into it, yeah. You've heard me say it. I've said it in other settings as well. I've been doing this for 40 years, and almost everything that has worked for 40 years doesn't work now. And there's a sense in which it's freeing that if we fail, we fail. Because nobody knows what's going to work, and so there is a sense in which I find myself, maybe for the first time in all of my life, certainly in all my ministry, of saying, let's just give it a try. Not being so certain of its success before I try it, and that's the new world in which we live in. Flexibility and adaptability. They're my new middle name because they were not my old middle name for sure.
Funny.
So what are you preaching on this
Oh my gosh. So apocalyptic by choice.
There you go.
I'm not sure this was so a few weeks ago decided, talking about the world 2020, all of this stuff that's happening, what does that most remind you of? Well, the book of Revelation. So if we're going to talk about the book of Revelation, what are the themes from there? So last week I preached on the Antichrist, which was hard, but I absolutely ended up loving loving just the challenge and the digging deep into that. It was such a different sermon for me. I think last week's I had almost no stories, right? So next week's theme will be the tree of life, because it'll be like Thanksgiving week and that promise, that promise. And this week, I thought it was a good idea to pull out that theme of empire. So when we sit and we talk about the empire, whether that be, like Rome, the United States government, and there's this thought that's starting to bubble up too, is empire is not always government, right? There are some really powerful organizations and companies that are kind of worldwide and cross oceans and TikTok is one that came up for me, right? So TikTok as an empire, basically, President Trump and TikTok, were which one is the one with the most power? And TikTok just kind of started selling itself into. So this is, as I think of empire and all of the different ways that presents itself, I'll be in Revelation 17. So then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great whore who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and with the wine of those of whose fornication the inhabitants of the earth have become drunk." So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was clothed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her fornication, and on her forehead was written a name, a mystery: Babylon the Great, mother of whores and of the earth's abominations. And I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the witnesses to Jesus.
There you go.
Whoa. Okay, so many things. One of the things that I'm thinking through, I don't think will make the sermon, but last week's sermon on the Antichrist, the point was it's never okay. I mean, one of the points in the sermon I made was it's never okay to dehumanize. It is never okay to remove somebody's humanity and place a label on them that is less than human. So then I read the biblical text for this week, and we're calling her a whore, which doesn't feel like an okay thing. So I've personally had to, kind of wrestle with some of that this week, and what that might mean, what this character in this text stands for. Another thing that I've really been I often in my sermons, I don't know that they show very often, but I usually have an undercurrent. It's something that I've kept close to, but haven't hit on, maybe not even at all. And I sort of did last week too, but this idea that in some of the hardest, craziest times, creating becomes an expression of those times better than explaining them. So I've been, in poetry and thinking about the imagery and arts and songs and music and those things that are created. And this feels to me like a creation coming out of times of struggle. When, for the author, the Roman Empire, and just to portray the Roman Empire as this whore, this seductress sitting on this beast, for me, it's helping me understand and read this text in a very different way than I would have before, and it's pushing me into poetry and songs and things that are growing out of this time. And of course, the theme itself is empires. So there's this interesting conflict that I'm running into as I read this text and as I study not very many commentaries, right? So United Methodist Church doesn't deal with this much at all. But how many times in the church I've run across the statement that and Barna Group has done studies that people outside the church say we're too political. The church has become too political. And I think through that, and I think of the ways, like if I as a pastor were not allowed to talk about anything that the culture has decided was political, how many things would I not be allowed to talk about?
Yeah.
How many things would the empire, however you define it, go, you know, I don't like that you're talking about that, so I'm going to pick it up, I'm going to make it political, and now it's off limits for you.
Yeah.
But I think what they're actually saying is that when the church is too political, what that means is that the church has been seduced and is now worshiping those things and putting those things in place of where God might call us. So this is the competing loyalties. Where who do we worship? Where do we place our values? Where do we place our loyalties? And how do we, when it comes down to it, make our choices?
Yeah. You know that you're right. If you pull out all of the controversial issues that have been politicized, you can't deal with things that people are thinking about and dealing with. I say this somewhat cynically. I cannot think of a single person who has told me that I was being too political when I agreed with their position. What they really mean is, you don't agree with me, so stop talking about it, is typically what they mean by that. And, the line I try to draw, and it's not always easy, the line I try to draw is between being partisan and dealing with issues that have political import and ramifications. If you talk about the things that people are talking about, big things in life, sexuality, abortion, race, immigration, those kind of things, they've all been politicized. But I think you're right. I think you're exactly right when you talk about loyalties. I think that I mentioned this to you earlier, and
I might have stolen the label loyalties on there, right?
What I mentioned was, and I say that again, sort of half cynically, but in our time, if you were to ask somebody if they would rather be accused of being a heretic or a traitor, I think most people would be fine with being a heretic, but not so fine with being a traitor, which gets at a little bit of where primary loyalty is. What's more important to you, that you be faithful in your understanding of who God is, or that you be loyal to your country? And I'm not saying we can't do both of those, but what's the fundamental primary loyalty in our lives as Christians?
My older son, he played hockey, and I remember before the hockey games, they would play the national anthem. And my emotional response is almost overwhelming every time, just the tears and the beauty of the song. And and then I was watching, I think it was a TikTok earlier, and the artist said, was not from the United States, was just pondering the question, like, why are you all like so patriotic? And I forget exactly how he put it, but he's like, we have symbols. He's like, the way you worship your symbols is different than my country. I think he was Canadian, and he said something like, you have like 5 national anthems. We have almost an entire hymnal, right? A national hymnal. And I'm not saying, and I don't know that he was right or wrong or what that is, but it did make me question and ponder. Like, it never occurred to me that not every country throughout history, their citizens didn't necessarily cry at their national anthem. Yeah. Like, it never occurred to me that it could be different, or would be.
What's interesting to me about that, though, is it shows if you reduce religion to a feeling, the feelings of hearing the national. I have season tickets to the Air Force football games, and the drama of the students marching in, the parachuters, the national anthem, all those kind of things. There is a drama that is emotionally evocative. And it feels similar to singing my favorite hymn, or being or singing, "Oh, come all ye faithful," as we process on Christmas Eve with 15. There's something emotional about that, and I think because of that, sometimes we intermesh or confuse our patriotic obligations with our religious obligations because they feel very similar and they have the same kind of evocative feel in there. And not that the feelings are bad, but I think what your text does is that it calls us to ask ourselves, but where is our primary loyalty? Mm-hmm. To whom, to what do we owe our highest allegiance? And what else falls in line behind that? And that's a tough question for people.
I think I read this, and it's easy for me to see where other people are doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is one of those texts that it makes it kind of revelation. It's a revealing, mm-hmm. right? It's a revealing of, for me, of the ways in which I might have divided loyalties. Mm-hmm. It is so much easier to point out what other people do. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It is really hard for me to sit down, where is it that I might, have been seduced?
Yeah. So is it ever possible for the church to stand back enough to be able to say no when the empire is wrong, say yes when the empire is right, and not be affected, not be drawn into. Churches don't pay taxes, right? I mean, there's a sense in which to push the empire could cost us. There used to be a day when things were closed on Sundays and Wednesday nights to protect the church, which people regret that isn't the way it is anymore. But it was never supposed to be the empire's job to protect the church. We were supposed to be faithful whether stores were open or not. We were supposed to take Sabbath. Whether school activities were happening or not, we were supposed to be present in our congregations. So it's easy for us to let the empire protect us, and then us become beholden to them rather than to be faithful to who we are. That raises a whole other bunch of
when I did a Sabbath sermon, excuse me, a few weeks ago, and that's one of the stories that I ran into. Is there was a preacher that got up there and preached on the Sabbath and protect the Sabbath and don't do stuff on the Sabbath, and a family went to a shopping, a strip mall after, and the pastor is getting out of his car at the strip mall after just preaching a sermon to keep the Sabbath holy. So they're watching him. They're like, maybe he's going to go into the drugstore, because that would make sense. Sometimes you have to go to the drugstore, and that would make sense. And maybe he was going to the grocery store, because that would kind of make sense too. But no, like he was going into a store that was just about shopping, just about consumerism, and because the government wasn't the government, but like the empire, I guess the empire was not protecting that he didn't even, that pastor didn't even follow his own on that. Well,
empires have lots of ways of seducing people.
And I guess I just want to say too that and I know I said it kind of in the beginning, but it's not necessarily government. I think the more that I'm in here and the more I'm wrestling through this and seeing this is, I think it's easy to just assume that it's government. And I don't think it necessarily is, nor do I think it is it always. I look at the organizations, the companies, our economic system, and how it just feels powerful.
Yeah, it does. So, well, I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
I have no idea what I'm going to say yet.
I bet it's good. So, can I close this with a prayer?
Absolutely.
All right, let's pray. Loving God, we've been given difficult texts this week, and there's a lot in there that is challenging to us and to the congregation. Help us to listen to you, to hear what you have to say, and to get out of the way of your word, so that as you speak through us, people might hear what you have for them to hear this day. Bless our congregations. Let them feel your nearness this day and throughout this week. Draw us together as we worship, and let us offer our praise to you. For it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.